got capital that's flowing from Macau, from New York City, from all around the world that lands on the Strip and wants to be on the Strip because of the magnitude of the deals that happen there. Mm-hmm. You know, some of these casinos will trade for, $1 billion to $2 billion. Mm-hmm. Where else in the United States do you have that
concentration of value?
Welcome to the Mountain West Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. I'm Chad Moore, and today we have a very special guest that we've been trying to get into the pod for a couple of months. It's Jeff Mitchell, who has an incredible story of being born and raised in Canada and then bouncing all over the place and ending up in Las Vegas of all places and making an incredibly successful career of it. So really interesting, compelling, inspiring story. So let's just jump into it. Jeff Mitchell, welcome.
Thanks, Chad.
If you'll give us a little bit of like an origin story, and I think you have a really, really interesting background. A lot of people don't know this, but you're actually from Canada.
Yeah, I grew up in Canada, born and raised.
How in the heck does a guy from Canada end up in Las Vegas?
Yeah, so I went on a LDS mission to Montreal, and while I was on my mission, my family decided to move to Bountiful, Utah. So I came.
Did they tell you that, like, well, in the middle?
It was like part way through. So I was like, hey, I'm not going back to Canada and coming down to Utah. Had been down to Utah a bunch of times because I had cousins and family that lived down here. Being a Mormon kid from southern Alberta, just had that experience and had some of that connectivity. My mom went to BYU and the U for a couple of years.
Okay, so there was a connection there.
There was a little bit of connection, and so came down to Bountiful, which was a different place to come home to. Not very diverse, pretty vanilla, and my passion in high school and kind of through high school and into college was rugby. Huh. So I had the opportunity to play for University of Utah.
Okay, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, rugby, and so got into the rugby program. Met a couple of guys on the rugby team. Kind of first friend that I had on the rugby team was a guy named Chris Welch.
Yeah,
Tom Welch's
son.
Yeah.
Great guy.
And Chris happened to be a member of a fraternity at the U, and so.
Well, I mean, just tell us which one it was.
So through that process, he's like, yeah, you should come rush the fraternity and check it out to meet some people, and so I ended up rushing and getting initiated into Beta Theta Pi.
Okay, that's why you're so connected to so many people. That
so
makes more sense.
So the University of Utah was a phenomenal experience for me. From an education standpoint, that was helpful, but from a connectivity and being able to be, somebody that didn't grow up here, didn't have, the high school friends, didn't have all of that connection, to be able to really like embed myself into the culture of Utah and University of Utah. So through that, I met Ben Brown, I met Mike Franks was one of my pledge brothers. Jordan Wall was a pledge brother of mine.
All these are commercial real estate personalities.
All these are commercial real estate personalities that are successful here. Chris Hatch was there as well. So all of those guys, started to establish some connection with them. And one of my good friends at the fraternity was a guy named Jake Olson. And I think, Chad, you know Jake.
Yeah.
And Jake was good friends and ended up partnering with Chris Hatch for a few years with Pro Brokers and Citus or whatever iteration things took there. But as far as the kind of step into commercial real estate, I got an opportunity to be an intern with at CBRE.
Okay, so that was your start, CBRE.
Yeah, so CBRE was the start. I was a data researcher building kind of relational databases. This is before CoStar, before any of that technology.
This is in what year?
This was like 2003.
Okay. Wow.
So I worked for the owners of The Office at the time, Larry Ryder, Paul Anderson, Frank Matheson.
Yeah, this is going back.
Some old guys.
A lot of really successful brokers or people in commercial real estate start in data and research.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that? I actually didn't, but a lot of people do and did. Why?
What I liked about it is it taught me to be able to look at numbers, look at kind of patterns, and be able to see and find opportunities.
Huh.
So we were building this relational database in Salesforce at the time, and I basically surveyed and walked every Class A, Class B, CBD, Salt Lake City office building here at the time, logging all the tenants, putting all of that together. And then we had a cold caller who was calling all of these tenants to try to move them around. And that was Jeff Rossi.
Oh, wow.
And so worked with him. And so at the end of the day, CBRE didn't feel like it was the long-term fit. And I had a degree in finance at the U. I was getting ready to graduate, but I was kind of in limbo because I didn't have a green card yet. I was on an F1 student visa. So as part of that F1 student visa, I could only really do quote unquote internships. And so all of my stuff had to be set up as more or less an internship. And so my mom went to college with Jeff Simmons, who was one of the owners of Bonneville Mortgage Company, and knew him for years. And so I was able to get a job at Bonneville Mortgage Company and kind of left the commercial real estate brokerage side and said, maybe I'll check out the finance side and kind of putting some of that together. And I was a grunt, again, researching, putting together loan packages, met Brady Larson through there. That was when he was starting his career at Bonneville, and got some exposure that way. And actually worked with Troy Hardy's mom. So there's
so many connections.
So many different connections
crazy.
there. And so that was kind of a unique experience. I learned a lot there, but realized that wasn't the world that I wanted to operate in. So at the time, I had a girlfriend, from the U. She had
The beginning of every bad conversation.
Sure.
At the time, I had a girlfriend.
Yeah, so she had gotten a job, and we were getting ready to graduate. This is like 2005. She'd gotten a job at SkyWest Airlines. And so she had an interview down in St. George. I was kind of shopping around trying to figure out what I wanted to do after graduating. I was talking to Commerce CRG and Mike Lawson about maybe working for Kip Paul because he was, I was exposed to him because he was putting together a lot of deals and I worked on a lot of the loan packages.
For sure, yeah.
So knew that he, had, a bunch of business and I could learn a lot from him. From a timing standpoint, he wasn't ready to make a move and bring on a junior. I guess he was too busy at the time. So I'd interviewed with Lawson, several times. And through the course of that, the gal that I was dating, we went down to St. George to go play golf, and she had an interview with SkyWest. And everything that you heard in the news was that St. George is blowing up. This is 2004, 2005 timeline where just, that Southern Utah market was on fire.
I was working on a huge project in St. George in
Rimrock.
2004. Yeah, Rimrock Marketplace, which is the Target anchored and everything else, which was like the first really big power center there.
Absolutely.
And that was like the frontier back in the day as far as commercial real estate.
And so I saw the signs. I saw Commerce had an office down there. So I go back up to the Commerce office, sit down with Lawson. He's like, yeah, if you want to wait 4 or 5 months, Kip will probably be ready to take you on as a junior. I was like, no, I got to go. I got to make some stuff happen. The irony of that whole kind of situation is when I was leaving St. George with the girl Lonnie at the time, we had played golf at a golf course down there called Entrada. And this is late spring. Things, weather starts to get hot. The last few holes at Entrada are in the middle of lava fields. So just my golf game just went to complete shit. So it was just garbage. And so I was upset. And as we were leaving St. George,
which is why I don't keep score at golf anymore, by the way.
I turned to Lonnie and I said, Lonnie, remind me never to effing move to this place. I hate St. George.
Sealing your fate forever.
Seriously. And so fast forward 2 weeks later, my truck is packed and I'm moving down to St. George because I had approached Lawson in that last interview. I was like, hey, what's happening in St. George?
Who was the guy running that office back in the day?
Ray Rosenthal.
Ray Rosenthal. Yeah.
So he was down there and he had an office person that was kind of doing some stuff. He had a big industrial project, the Fort Pierce Industrial Park, that he kicked off with Gilbert Jennings down there. And
so I was just for context, I was at, as you know, but I was at whatever it was called at the time, Commerce CRG or Colliers or Cushman, whatever it was at
working
that specific.
with Bob and Herm, right?
Yeah, and I remember they opened that office in St. George, and it was kind of a big deal back in the day.
Sure.
Like we have 10 offices now, but for a brokerage, which at the time I think they were the dominant brokerage in Utah, for them to open up another office in St. George, that was like, whoa.
Something's going on down there.
Why?
Yeah,
Why are you opening an office in St. George?
And yeah, it was, that office had, so I basically said to Lawson, I was like, so who's doing retail? Like what's the story with retail? And just prior to that, actually, to give context, I'd interviewed with Robert Cooper and Taylor DeBry. I was going to work with Hatch and Jake, trying to. And Cooper's like, well, I just don't know if you're thick skin enough to be in this environment. I was like, all right,
That sounds like something Cooper would say.
Yeah, exactly. So Lawson was like, if you want to focus on retail, you can go down to St. George and just start building the retail down there, because we don't have anyone that's focused on the retail stuff. And so my truck was packed. I moved in with my step grandmother who lived down there. Lived with her for about 2 weeks, and then she kicked me out, and I had to find another place.
Just fully committed at this point.
But the only thing, so basically, like, I'd never been a broker. This was all basically pioneering. I was kind of being mentored by an industrial broker that sort of understood retail a bit.
Yeah.
But what I did understand, and going back to the point of like the data and the research, I understood how to research. I understood how to survey a market, build a database. So I started logging all the shopping centers, all the owners, cold calling people. And then I also kind of started to dig in, because there was a story in Southern Utah to tell that a lot of people kind of from Utah maybe realized, but people outside of Utah didn't, that it was a fast growing market with kind of an underserved retail environment. And there was opportunity to add more based on not just the in-place population, but all of the tourism and all of the activity that happened.
Yeah. And people think about St. George now, and St. George is this incredible, diverse economy that's growing like crazy. Sure. And it kind of was back then, but it was sleepy still, like relatively speaking.
It was heavy retirement still.
So you're playing around in a sub market that is sleepy.
It's sleepy. So I realized I had to have a story to tell. I had to have something to kind of pitch. So what I did is I took all of like the data points from the retail taxable sales for the entire state of Utah.
Again, from your data research.
From the data research, right. So I took that and I basically put together what I called the St. George overview of retail market growth. And I was able to show graphically that St. George, although it was population-wise quite a bit smaller than like your Provos, your Logans, all of these other kind of mid-tier kind of markets.
Pop back then's like 130.
Something like that, right?
That. Yeah.
But like in a lot of categories, it was performing at or better than like, Salt Lake City and some of these larger markets. And so I had at least a kind of a narrative and a story that I could go to people and say, hey, you're not in St. George. Here's this interesting data. Are you familiar with this market? Would you consider opening a store? Because at the time, I really wanted to bring like Whole Foods or Wild Oats or like some of these cool grocers that I would shop at when I was here in college.
Wild Oats, I totally forgot about those guys.
And so I figured out a property. There's a property very close to Rimrock Marketplace that had been sitting as an RV park.
Settlers RV Park.
Settlers RV Park.
Yeah, I remember this one.
So, there was
I actually negotiated on it. I think Woodbury was trying to buy it before, and I think you beat us out, or I can't remember the exact story.
No, So it was like between the outlets at Zion at the time, or Zion Factory Outlets as they were called. It had the first J. Crew in Utah, the first like Ralph Lauren in Utah. Some kind of one retailers had come to St. George because of like the tourism and the outlet program, but there was this RV park right in the middle between that and this Rimrock Marketplace, which was Target, Lowe's, great retail, and there's these trailers and a bunch of RVs, and it's like, okay, well, this is prime like Main and Main. So like if any of these retailers like that aren't here are going to come to the market, they should probably come to this site. And so figuring out that deal, it was owned by, as you probably remember, just a bunch of old St. George families that were cash flowing it.
Yep. And a big portion of the site was unusable.
Yeah, there was hillside. There was a bit of a hillside thing that had to be considered. There was another piece that was owned by a guy out of like Surprise, Arizona. The main kind of spokesman for the family. So it was like Gooblers that owned it, but a guy named Rod Savage was like the main guy. He was a CPA.
Yep.
So Ray knew Rod Savage and kind of made an introduction for me. And I just started hitting this guy up. Hey, what is it going to take to sell? What is it going to take to sell this? And their number was like $10 million.
Yeah.
And I think Woodbury had come in at, it was like 6.5, 7 million.
That sounds right. Yeah. Which was a lot, actually.
Which was a lot. And then some other guys were like maybe 8 million or so. And the number, I guess, was 10 million. So I came up here for an ICSC event, and I ran into a guy, interesting fellow named Dave Rose. And this Dave Rose guy was from Southern California, from like Anaheim, and he was quote unquote a developer. Come to find out, he hadn't really developed anything ever.
He was a developer in his own mind.
Right. But he was a deal guy. So I kind of pitched him on this property. He's like, yeah, no, that sounds like a really, really, really great property. And I think I know some people that'll want to, take this down. So we figured out a way to get it in contract, with an earnest money deposit of about $150,000
at $10 million.
At $10 million.
Wow.
So we get it in contract at $10 million. I remember coming up to the Commerce office because I think you guys still wanted that deal for Woodbury.
Yeah.
Woodbury knew that it was.
I'm sure I laughed at you and said you'll never close that
and
deal.
Joe Cooley sat me down trying to basically like just pry information out of it, just to get an angle or whatever, and saying, well, I don't think your guys are going to close on it, but maybe we should talk because it sounds like you've got some control over the deal. I was like, okay, yeah. So we pitched the deal, because obviously this Dave Rose guy couldn't close on the property himself. Come to find out. But the property's in contract. He's got earnest money in play, and it's still a great property. And so we start shopping it around.
This is the biggest deal you've ever worked on at the time. Like, how does a guy who came from the week before that working on a 1,200 square foot nail salon, now you're working on a $10 million deal? Like, what's your mindset? How do you have that level of confidence to even have that conversation?
It was really all about vision and just seeing, hey, like I see the potential here. There's an opportunity. This market has some holes in it, and I figured out how to fill them. But I need a property to do it. Mm-hmm. And what better property than St. George Boulevard and I-15 with freeway signage between two of the top performing retail centers in that entire market.
How many years had you been back in brokerage at that point?
So I got that property into contract in 2007.
So you've been doing it for like 3 years?
2 years.
I mean, that's really cool. I know I wouldn't have had the confidence to have that level of conversation 2 years into my career, but I do think there's that common thread of like the research data where you knew the underlying fundamentals and you felt confident, like this is the story to tell. This is the narrative. I see the gaps in a market like St. George and I know this is going to work.
And it almost didn't. So we shopped it around. We ended up finding a group called Excel Realty Trust. If you're familiar with that, Gary Sabin and his crew. Mitt Romney's son, Matt, was working for that group. And turned out this Dave Rose guy had opened up a Rocky Mountain chocolate factory as a franchisee in one of their projects in Anaheim.
Okay.
So he had a relationship with these guys, and these guys got it. Gary's brother, I guess, lived in southern Utah and kind of validated this for these guys. And so you've got this Wall Street kind of high-level capital, a development group that's built stuff in California that has a connection to southern Utah. And so they became that developer for that project and kind of took over the contract and moved towards closing. Huh. Well, what ended up happening is, 2008. So the property,
the wall of 2008.
The property ended up closing at the very end of 2007.
Wow.
So it was like October, November. Through that process, I had actually moved from St. George because I'd lived in St. George for a year and a half. At the time, I realized that I needed to be in a bigger market from a retail standpoint because I wanted to specialize in retail. I didn't want to be like a jack of all trades. I wanted to be hyper-focused.
There wasn't physically enough business
inventory,
in
enough
St. George
business in St. George
time.
just to be focused on that. And so moving to Las Vegas made sense. And so Commerce was buying the Cushman & Wakefield office in Vegas.
That's right. Mike Hillis
was running that. He was the broker then at the time for St. George. And the same situation. There were guys that were doing office, guys that were doing some industrial. Some of the top guys in that market. A guy named Perry Michelli was, kind of the dominant player, but nobody was doing retail. So Hillis said, hey, if you want to come down to Vegas, you can start that retail division and start kind of figuring retail out.
Did you hesitate on that? Like, did you ever think, what is a kid from Alberta doing in Las Vegas?
So Vegas, if you would have told me when I was 18 years old, before going on my mission, before all of that up in Canada, that I'd be living in Las Vegas ever.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have said, you're crazy,
Right.
because this is like, it wasn't even on the radar screen.
Right.
It wasn't even close. But, again, it was
Right place, right time.
right
and
place, right time.
experience.
And I met a girl.
Okay, here we go.
And so she was living in Vegas. We kind of had connected a little bit. She was running some stores for Abercrombie and Fitch down there. She was actually really good friends she went to high school with Scott Brady.
Uh-huh.
And so we met through Scott. Scott
Okay.
knew that I was considering moving down to Vegas. He's like, oh, hit this girl up. I knew her from high school. And so kind of hit it off. And I was like, oh, Vegas seems kind of interesting. The market's a lot bigger. I had made some relationships with a couple of retailers through the Cushman Wakefield network, one being Skechers, who is a tenant that I still work with today. And so they had some requirements down there. There were some other things that I could kind of sink my teeth into, and I knew how to research.
When you go from St. George, Utah brokerage, which is about as small as you could get at the time, to Las Vegas, which now is considered a primary market, but back then was probably on the cusp, kind of a secondary primary market. Like, that's a huge jump in level of sophistication.
Absolutely.
Did you feel that? Like, what was it like
Well,
going into that?
Yeah, so part of it, like obviously having kind of some of the background with CBRE and kind of like the big green engine, going to some of the Cushman and Wakefield broker symposiums, like in Chicago and some of these other markets, exposed me to like kind of more of that corporate, sophisticated brokerage. But in terms of transacting and deal making and all of that, like, yeah, I had a few things under my belt, selling some land, selling some other things, doing a few leases. But yeah, Vegas was a big market. There were, sky was the limit. There was, restaurants, there was the Strip, there was all of these kind of environments that you could play in. But unbeknownst to me, like I moved to Vegas in 2007. Again, we're talking about the crest, and so that market started, it was at its absolute tip top.
Yep.
And then
And it was crazy
and
at its tip top.
It was crazy at its tip top. Like I had some listings in some shopping centers that, at the time we were, $40 a foot, $36-40 a foot, back then in
When
2007.
land in Utah was $5.
Right. And so rents were crazy high, but it was interesting because the market seemed like it was like stalling. Like there was almost like this kind of disconnect between tenants that I think were probably feeling some pressure, and these landlords and these rents and the demand that had been kind of irrationally uplifted to a point where it was almost unattainable. And then 2008 financial crisis hits and everything just completely collapses.
Yeah.
So I had 5 or 6 Skechers deals that were kind of at lease or leases signed that all got canceled. A bunch of our listings, ended up like having to completely reset. So these centers where we were $36 a foot, all of a sudden were, $18 to $20 a foot, like just basically trying to give space away.
I came into Vegas in 2008, right after that with Winco, as you know.
Right.
And we were looking for stores or looking for land to acquire to build Winco shopping centers. And in my entire career, I have never seen a market that decimated and developers and brokers and everybody so disheartened. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. And Vegas is boom or bust to some degree or another, right? Where Utah and Idaho are a little more mild,
kind of steady. Yeah.
But I remember having meetings with people, conversations with people, and I've never seen anything like that before. I've never seen that level of...
Well, and everyone was syndicating. Everyone was a syndicator in Vegas. They were just basically, putting money into deals, zero down, whatever, and just waiting for the market to appreciate. And then they'd flip those deals and, cash out. Well, there were a ton of people that just basically were left holding the bag where those deals couldn't move at the prices that they, had put them into contract or closed on them and were carrying on hard money. And that hard money started to get vicious.
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I met with some of those guys.
yeah, and so that the whole thing just really collapsed. Like I had bought a condo when I first moved down there in 2007, stated income, paid $280,000 for it at the time, and fast forward 2010, 2009, my neighbor short sells his for $90,000.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well, I have no money in this.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I'm not going to, recapture that money necessarily. So made that move and, rented a spot and just kind of buckled down and said, okay, I'm going to ride out the storm. I've put in my time. I've, done the research. I've made the connections in this market. This market is kind of where I want to be. Like my parents were calling me up saying, hey,
what are you doing?
What are you doing? Do you want to move back,
Come
up
back
to Utah?
to Bountiful, Utah.
Come back to Bountiful or whatever. And I was like, you know what? Like Vegas is, a high risk, high reward market. I have some chips on the table, Mom, and I think I'm going to get paid. I think it's going to work out.
How does a kid from Canada again like adjust to that? Because Vegas is, and maybe I'm wrong, but Vegas is really different than Utah and Idaho and other surrounding states in that the broker. I'm talking about everything, but let's talk about brokerage.
Sure.
Like it's a unique human that can do commercial real estate in Las Vegas. Again, this is my opinion. You tell me if I'm wrong, but they feel like they are risk on, whereas I'm kind of a risk off guy. Like I get nervous, but man, you do deals with people in Vegas. They are cowboys, man. They have no worry about risk, and they do some incredible deals and make tons of money when times are good.
Right. Well, and it's always been a little bit of that cowboy mentality down there because, you look at the kind of the origin of Las Vegas being, okay, initially it was Pony Express, Mormon Fort, by some springs on the way to California. A lot of the settlers that came down from Utah, as compelled by Brigham Young to settle the West, came through Vegas and established kind of a presence. And so there was that initially. And then, fast forward into the 30s and 40s and, the mob out of the East Coast and Ohio and, New York and, those states realized, hey, this is the Wild West. We can open up some of these resorts and start kind of building an empire where we're not going to be under the scrutiny of a lot of eyeballs and do what we do.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of these things were successful, obviously, and it started to become like a gambling mecca and a place for people to come from California, come from wherever, and visit what was called Sin City. Eventually, some of these deals started to get bigger and started to get way more involved. And so the mob realized, hey, we're not bankable with these New York banks, with these financial institutions that kind of know what we're up to. Mm-hmm. Where do we go for money? They looked to Salt Lake City.
Really?
And so a lot of the initial casinos and a lot of that mob-built product down there was funded by Mormon bankers from Zions Bank, from all of these, because the banks up here, because of like the Mormon connection and the perception of Utah.
There's a similar thing going on there.
Similar stigma where people didn't trust what was happening here.
Okay.
And so it was kind of like this fortuitous relationship that was created between one extreme and another. And they came together and said, hey, we can make some money here. And so Tom Thomas and the Mack family, all of these kind of old families started funding these initial casino projects and being the bank behind it. Then you fast forward to the Howard Hughes era, and all of his financing came from financial institutions up here in Salt Lake.
A lot of his financial people
were all kind
Mormon.
of members of the church and kind of connected with that environment. And so there's a a very, very strong connection between what's happened and what's been built in Las Vegas and a lot of the finance and a lot of the money that has flowed out of Utah, because Salt Lake, Utah, it's a very industrious, very entrepreneurial kind of frugal environment to some extent as well. But everyone wants a return on their money. Yeah. And so Vegas was the perfect spot to
get that return,
based on vice and based on sin, based on everything that like the church was kind of antithesis to. Yeah. But hey, let's make some money.
Interesting.
And so that environment has always kind of been the home of dreamers and mavericks. And if you can kind of believe it and think it, it can happen in Vegas of any place.
Do you, from a commercial real estate perspective, is the Strip considered completely different than everything else surrounding that? Like the
Yes.
Strip is a world unto itself
I
from
would
a real
say-
estate perspective.
Yeah, I would say from a real estate perspective, absolutely, because you've got capital that's flowing from Macau, from New York City, from all around the world that lands on the Strip and wants to be on the Strip because of the magnitude of the deals that happen there. Some of these casinos will trade for $1 billion to $2 billion. Where else in the United States do you have that type
Concentration of
concentration
value.
of value?
Yeah.
The other piece is, even from like a leasing and a brokerage standpoint, call it 90% of brokers, maybe even 95% of brokers don't even touch the Strip because it's a world that they don't understand. So most of the brokerage community is focused on the suburban environment. And
Is that because the deals are done outside of Vegas? Like you have institutional player, BlackRock or whatever.
Yeah,
they're
there's-
really just doing deals at a higher level.
There's a little bit of that. There's kind of a small cadre of in-place investment advisory groups that are on the gaming side of things that can make a lot of money. CBRE has a very strong gaming division.
That's right.
And so they get involved in trading a lot of these and doing the analytics. Even within the CBRE office, like the gaming division has like a key card access only, like completely cordoned off,
No way.
like sequestered part of their office
Oh, wow.
that they operate in because of confidentiality, because of gaming restrictions,
Like
because
the
of
cash room.
Yeah,
You have to
seriously.
swipe.
so that's kind of, so it's, yeah, a lot of it's behind closed doors. A lot of it is kind of just, you have to have a relationship. You have to have a connection. You have to cross your T's, dot your I's, like double sign, do all of that. Like the first deal that I worked on the Strip was, I had an opportunity. And so I guess, yeah, just from context standpoint, being who I am and being kind of growth minded and wanting to succeed, I was like, I need to play around and do some stuff on the Strip. Not everyone wants to touch it. Not everyone has the ability to do it, but
Yeah.
I've got to score a deal.
And at this point, you got a really strong retail background, retail brokerage background, and so obviously the Strip has a huge retail component where a lot of these national retailers want a presence on the Strip, and there's a whole interesting subtext there about a lot of those retailers don't actually do incredible sales.
Correct.
But it's more of
It's a flag. It's an advertisement. So, you pitch it as, hey, this is your opportunity to have your name in lights. You may not, it may not be your number one store, but you've got to be here.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that flag, and you've got to basically factor it in. Like you're going to pay rent that doesn't feel comfortable, but you write it off as like a line item on your marketing and PR advertising
Yeah.
budget, and move the numbers around so it can make some sense.
which makes my head explode. Like it makes no sense to me, but and you're probably going to talk about this one, but we should talk about that Burlington deal, which really
Absolutely.
is incredible.
So the pretext to that is, so I had an opportunity to do a Bubba Gump Shrimp Company deal on the Strip. I had a relationship with the
Remember
CEO.
that. Is that still there?
It's still there.
Is it? Yeah. Okay.
So I teed up this Bubba Gump Shrimp Company deal, got it all figured out. The CEO ends up kind of leaving. He ends up selling Bubba Gump to Tillman Fertitta, billionaire out of Texas, claim jumper, had all of those other restaurants, kind of hospitality. He was cousins with some of the big casino operators, the Fertitta family that owned the UFC and the Red Rock Resorts Company. And he ends up taking over Bubba Gump, kind of basically had the deal figured out. And then the deal kind of went on hold, died. I didn't have my I's dotted and my T's totally crossed on that deal. And so the deal gets resurrected, and I'm, talking to these guys saying, hey, like, are we making this deal? They're like, yeah, we're making this deal.
We call that being naked in the business,
right?
When you're just
So
naked.
I was naked. There was a big fee that was involved in it. Well, which I thought we were obviously due. They basically said, sue us.
You're like, okay.
I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Just against,
And they're like, sue us, or we'll pay you $100K on the deal. So I talked to our partner at the time and said, hey, what do you want to do? He's like, well, I think let's just take the 100K and move on.
Yeah, take it and run.
So we end up doing that. So a little bit gun shy vis-a-vis the strip, but understand that, okay, this is a world that's worth playing in because of the deal size. Have to be a little bit more cautious and careful. And it's not like a handshake, Southern Utah, St. George deal or anything like that. And so the next iteration of strip deal kind of came to play, and Skechers needed a new flagship store. So through that, I had a relationship with a hard money lender guy who early on in his career had built and basically kind of came up with a concept in Las Vegas to do more or less like a Times Square type experience. So he was, when he was like 35 years old, he put together the Coca-Cola M&M World project on Las Vegas Boulevard, and kind of changed the narrative vis-a-vis retail on the strip to being kind of embedded in the casinos, to like these, signage, flagship, bright lights, exposure for brands. Because did Coca-Cola need a store on Las Vegas Boulevard? No. Did M&M need a store on Las Vegas Boulevard? They had a headquarters in Henderson, an operational factory and headquarters for the West Coast. So it kind of made some sense, but like he pitched these guys and said, hey, you guys can have like this experiential kind of flagship opportunity with this showcase mall that he put together. And so this was a client of ours, and he had a relationship. So he ends up selling this project to these guys out of New York, a group called Gindy Capital. And Gindy Capital, their partners own Century 21 department stores, which is like an old-time department store chain in New York. Connected me with them. I was able to figure out, hey, there's this space for this Mexican restaurant at the time called La Salsa, had like a giant margarita, like yardstick margaritas or sign. They were kind of struggling from a number standpoint. So I approached the Gindy guys. I was like, hey, we want to do a flagship for Skechers. And so we were able to basically buy out that La Salsa lease, do like a 9,000 square foot Skechers flagship, have the Skechers sign and, bright lights on the strip, the exposure.
And just for perspective, like what's the value of this lease transaction?
This is probably, that one was probably like a $25 million lease.
Yeah. Whereas a typical Skechers in a neighborhood shopping center,
$2 million.
So so that just gives you some perspective. It's anything on the strip is 10 times
10x,
and probably a lot more than anything else you're dealing with in the normal commercial real estate world.
Absolutely. So then, fast forward and getting back to, this Burlington deal. So Gindy Capital ended up buying another building next to Showcase Mall, which was the Smith & Wollensky Steakhouse. So they bought the steakhouse and came up with a concept to tear it down and do some more retail. And so we had been looking and kind of shopping around to do a flagship store because Ross, Marshalls, all of these brands had some really good, strong performing stores on Las Vegas Boulevard.
They're actually like producing tons of sales too.
The Ross store on the strip, they have a Ross on one side of the street, and they just opened one like a year ago on the other side of the street. The one on the one side of the street, that OG one close to Burlington, is the number one in their system.
That's crazy.
And so we'd been having these conversations with Burlington about doing something flagship on the strip, because of what the competitors had been doing. So I had this relationship with the Gindy Capital guys, had transacted with them with Skechers. So they understood that we could get some stuff done. Started talking to them about, hey, what about putting Burlington in this project? They're like, yeah, we can create this, 50,000 square foot, because that was the prototype at the time of Burlington. 50,000 square foot space. It would be like subterranean, so underground. They basically dug out under the Smith & Wollensky. We can provide signage. They had Target that was also interested in doing their urban format, and then some restaurants and all of that. So ended up, kind of fast forward, being able to structure a deal with Burlington for that flagship store. Again, Burlington, doesn't perform like a flagship in terms of numbers, and doesn't even perform as strong as, the top suburban store in the Las Vegas market. But their name is in lights.
Huge advertising opportunity.
And they've got that advertising and that presence.
And that's like a $50 million deal, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Big deal, big fee, with all of that. And again, like knowing what I knew from the past, we had the T's crossed and the I's dotted and everything kind of was in check. We're a little concerned because that Burlington was slated to open right in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of like consternation. Are these guys actually going to open the store? Is it going to,
Right.
are things going to get shelved or,
Nobody knew, yeah.
attitudes changed? But yeah, they ended up opening and
Yeah.
ended up, being non-contingent, deal gets inked. And
And it's an awesome store. Beautiful.
yeah, it's
Amazing.
a beautiful store. And, they've learned a lot of things in terms of operating in those kind of tourist high profile environments. And, hopefully long-term it's a success for them.
What's your advice to somebody who is like you or me, who finds himself in, a bountiful Utah of the world and wants to break into commercial real estate? I mean, you basically went from a nobody, like we all were or are, to like the guy in Las Vegas who's doing these incredible deals, who's super successful, making all this money. Like, what's your advice to someone who's on the other side, like we were?
I think at the end of the day, and this is what I've always admired about you, Chad, is that just keep your head down, work hard. Don't let ego get in the way of relationships, of connections. That humility and kind of that drive and just the work ethic, I think is the key. In this business, as we all know, like the one kind of secret sauce or that secret weapon for people to be successful is really grit. So you've got to be able to take those no's and you've got to be able to press through challenges and obstacles and problem solve and realize, hey, like this is where I want to go. This is what I want to see happen. And you're kind of like a salmon swimming upriver. You're avoiding the rocks, you're avoiding the pitfalls, you're avoiding the grizzly bears, right? Yeah. And you're getting to that that spawning ground or whatever it is, right? Like it's being single-minded in that objective.
Yeah.
And really kind of working towards that.
And would you suggest that someone starting their career really dive into that research and data side, like you did?
I think so. So the research and data aspect is tantamount to being able to pitch, to talk intelligently about a market, to understand what's going on. As somebody coming into the business today, really leveraging and getting familiar and getting competent with AI, I think is the next wave. So using AI to augment your data, augment the ability to connect things together, being able to kind of direct that AI and say, hey, like, here's what I'm looking for. Here are these numbers, or here's this location. Tell me, what similarities does this location have with, all of these other spots? And those tools expedite that process, give greater depth to understanding that. And then a lot of the clients that we work with, for good or for bad, may or may not be sophisticated. So as one of the things that, my early mentor, Ray Rosenthal, impressed upon me and kind of admired, because he was old school. He was, pen and paper,
right.
Notebooks.
Didn't have a computer probably.
Barely, like, single finger typing on the computer, But he always said to me, he was like, what is going to be like your weapon is just your ability to utilize and leverage technology. Because he was impressed by that. He was like, Jeff, like, figure this out for me, or do this or do that. And so I was always comfortable using that, to my advantage as kind of an assistant or kind of an amplifier to kind of be able to do more and be more effective.
Yeah.
And so, that continues throughout the entire career. Like, you and I have both seen some of the old guys in the business almost become irrelevant because they can't use some of those tools. Like, they're not using, the demographics. They're not using, the advanced mapping and graphics. All of these tools are critical to being able to really tell that story for our clients and be able to get deals done.
Man, that's such a cool story. Just inspirational from start to finish. And again, that theme of hard work, consistency, grit, getting a no 99 times for one yes.
Sure.
And also just the background of that research and data, how you've incorporated that into being super successful. I think it's a really, really cool story.
There's luck too, right?
Yeah,
you get lucky.
I mean, yeah, sure, there's luck in life, but I like the mantra that the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the case in certainly in your story. But at the end of every podcast, we usually jump in and talk about market trends. And in this instance, because you're the guy in Vegas, I'd love to just put a Vegas spin on it.
Sure.
And a lot of people are talking about tourism right now in Vegas and that it's down. I actually read an article, I think I sent it to you the other day, of how Canadians in particular are visiting Vegas less. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah, the Canadian visitation, which has been a big component, like in terms of category of tourists that comes to Vegas, California is number one. And the Canadian segment is usually number 2 or number 3, just in terms of being able to like segment and say, hey, this is where these people are coming from. That Canadian tourism has dropped off a lot because of some of the political stuff that's gone on. I think it ultimately comes back because Vice, the Canadians love to gamble.
when
They
has
love
Vegas never bounced back? It bounces back every time.
It always bounces back. The sea change and kind of the wave of kind of newness and what's happening now is professional sports.
Yeah.
That's been an absolute game changer for just the dynamic of tourism and the reasons that people are visiting Vegas. So, with initially the Golden Knights being kind of a organic team that was created in Vegas for Vegas, the first professional team.
Resounding success.
Resounding success. The fact that we came out of the gates, going to the Stanley Cup in the first year,
That was crazy.
and then 3 years later winning the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
A phenomenal ride and a great story in terms of what happens in Vegas, can be successful and stay in Vegas and thrive. That was kind of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, for other sports, being able to say, hey, this market is viable. So, Raiders come, which again, the Raiders themselves have not been the same level of success, but that venue is phenomenal.
Yeah.
People love to come to Allegiant Stadium to watch games. And so a lot of tourism now is coming from, if somebody from Kansas City, Missouri, or from, Cleveland, Ohio, or wherever want to go to an away game, are they going to go?
That's the place to go, man.
Yeah,
That is
they're coming to Vegas to come see their team,
And you got-
beat up on the Raiders,
And
right?
you got the MLB now.
And so with the A's coming, like Oakland hates us because we're stealing all of their teams. But, it's like,
What basketball team could you steal? Golden State,
yeah,
Warriors.
Golden State, something. For basketball, I'd like to see us get a new expansion team.
Yeah.
I think that's always
That happens,
the better
right?
play.
I think that happens
Oh no,
in
it's happening. It's there's a huge project that's on the books that's been approved by the county that I think will be the NBA kind of epicenter tourism district in that zone. So yeah, combine all of that together. And now, when I first moved to Vegas, the concept of professional sports because of the sports betting
Yeah.
and all of that
Didn't
conflict was just like, nobody thought it was ever going to be possible.
And now everybody gambles from their phone. So
And
it doesn't
everyone
matter.
gambles from their phone. It doesn't matter. And they're gambling from wherever. And DraftKings moves their headquarters to Las Vegas. All of this stuff happens because of pro sports. And so that's, I think, the next, that's the wave that we're on right now. And that continues to roll and continues to elevate the experience for people wanting to come and visit Vegas. The other thing that changed, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart, is through kind of, I guess, coming through COVID. Like, so I guess, well, out of the recession, a lot of these casinos were trying to figure out, okay, gaming numbers are down. What do we do? People still need to eat. So they started doing all of these partnerships, and thanks to the Food Network and some of these outlets, people started to become familiar with like cuisine and celebrity chefs. So a lot of these casinos started branding with celebrity chefs and opening up really unique, great restaurants and bringing, the best of the best from New York City, the best of the best from LA, from Tokyo, from wherever. And so now, in the course of 18 whatever years that I've been there, the food scene in Las Vegas is completely transformed. There's
And you're a foodie.
I'm a foodie.
A lot of people don't know that, but you are a foodie. Anytime I go to Vegas or almost anywhere, my first text message is to Jeff, like, okay, where am I going?
Right.
And
the concentration and the options, we've got, unbeknownst to a lot of people, there's a very robust and established Chinatown in Las Vegas with phenomenal Asian cuisine all up and down that corridor. Because a lot of people came to be dealers and whatever in the casinos, and they congregated and started opening restaurants, and then chefs off the strip get delusioned with the casino operating environment. They're like, I'm going to move on. I've got some investors. I'm going to open up something off the strip. And so now we've become a food destination. And so, pro sports, food, experiential retail. So Area 15 being like partnering with Universal Studios to do these mega experiential kind of installations with Meow Wolf, and all of these things are drawing kind of that millennial Gen Alpha crowd that maybe aren't interested in putting money on the tables, but they're going to nightclubs, they're going to restaurants, they're going to these experiential things. And so Vegas always finds a way to transform what it is, what it's offering. But the common thread is you come here for the fun. Like it's a place where people want to, let loose and be a different person for 3 days and go back to their desk job in the Midwest, right? Like that's
right.
That's the dream. So,
well, I'll tell you what, man, Vegas is such an awesome market and so diverse, and there's always booms, there's always busts, but Vegas, long Vegas, every time it always bounces back. And when it does, it's a new, creative, awesome thing that the world's never seen before. So really appreciate your story. Appreciate the timeline, the origin story. What an inspirational story for a lot of people who are thinking about breaking into commercial real estate. I mean, if you follow Jeff's footsteps, what a great business plan that would be. So congrats on all the success.
Thanks.
I'd love to do another podcast and just talk about all these crazy things that are happening in Vegas, because we could fill an hour just talking about that.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, man. Next time you're up here, we should really